Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the series A Journey Towards Emotional Self-Regulation. I am Smriti Gopal. I am an educator, a conscious parenting coach, a conscious living coach, and a present moment awareness coach. And in this video, I'll be talking about boundaries. You may be thinking, boundaries not an emotion. Yeah, it certainly is not an emotion. However, boundaries are extremely essential for self-regulation. Boundaries tell us what is okay for us and what is not okay for us. It tells us what we can handle and what we cannot handle. And knowing this is very crucial for emotional self-regulation. So we go as prepared as the situation needs us, or we don't go, or we find out tools that we need when we are having this meeting. So it really helps us in our process of self-regulation. Boundaries are extremely essential, but they're also extremely difficult to hold and set, especially because our conditioning that comes with us from childhood. It's not easy for us to set and hold boundaries. Nevertheless, we need to do it for ourselves to be emotionally self-regulated. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is really what boundaries are and how we can set and hold them, and what is coming in the way. Then what can we do to remove these obstacles? So let's talk about what boundaries are not first, because I think there is a big misconception which even I had, and so do all my clients. So if you are thinking that a boundary tells another how they should treat you, then that's not a boundary. Boundaries are not barriers. They're not walls that we build around ourselves. And boundaries are not for others. They are for ourselves. This is actually the biggest clarification, that boundaries are not for others. They are for us. So now that we know what boundaries are not, let's talk about what boundaries are. It's very simply said, determining what's okay and what's not okay for us and communicating this. That is what a boundary is. I have a quote from Brené Brown in her book Atlas of the Heart, and this is what it says. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. This is such a beautiful quote. So, we generally tend to think that boundaries are not compassion. It's being not caring. But on the contrary, boundaries are very essential for compassion, for the other and for ourselves. And boundaries really mean caring. Because if you did not care for this person, you would not set the boundary. You would have just said tata bye-bye and walked out of that relationship. But you're actually staying in it and setting a boundary so that that relationship can be healthy. Boundaries are for us, by us, and we are going to have to enforce it. A boundary is like a permeable membrane. That means things can come in, right? You decide what comes in and what goes out, both in our control. That is a boundary. A boundary is not a wall where nothing comes in and nothing goes out. That is going to be claustrophobic for the person. And the true essence does not thrive without interaction and this permeable membrane. However, if this membrane is not there, then we become one. Where I end and where you begin is not known to us. We are together, and that is called enmeshment. I think this is very, very important to clarify, because I've had conversations with people from different generations where they actually think having a boundary is a wrong thing. It's a bad thing because it's so not caring. So that's why I think this video is so essential to know that actually it means we are caring a lot. We really want to have such a good relationship with you that we'd like to feel comfortable. not come to it with a resentment and anger or hatred. So I think boundaries, the clarification around boundaries is a very important topic while you are on the path of self-regulation. The other important point that we need to keep in mind is that the other person does not have to agree with our boundary. It's because it's not about them at all. It's about us. So they don't have to agree. Now, holding a boundary could cause emotional turmoil in other people. Well, that is their business. It's not ours. If somebody really loves you and cares for you, they see how important this boundary is for you and they will support you in holding it. So boundaries are a prerequisite for compassion and empathy. If you want to be caring, be compassionate, then boundaries are essential. And that's why Brené Brown's definition is so beautiful. It is a place from where I love you and myself. That is the most important thing. And that's what boundaries really do. So having boundaries is really a very important aspect of self-love. There are so many types of boundaries. For example, there are stone boundaries and sand boundaries. Sand boundaries are boundaries which are flexible, and stone boundaries are which are not flexible. And in both cases, your well-being is kept intact. Emotional boundaries, time boundaries, intellectual boundaries are other boundaries. In emotional boundaries, we don't allow others to tell us how to feel. In intellectual boundaries, we don't tell others how we should be thinking or what we should be thinking. And in time boundaries, the amount of time that we spend on something is determined by us and not the other. Again, you can have stone and sand boundaries in any of these based on your understanding of the situation and keeping your well-being intact. So let's talk about really the process of setting boundaries. First, of course, is setting boundaries, creating boundaries, having boundaries. And why does this happen? You realize something is not working in a relationship. Let's just take a relationship and something is not working. But this relationship is extremely important to you. And that is why you set a boundary. So the first step is setting a boundary. And while doing this, in this process, we have to find out what is important to us. Why is it important? Because we need to know what we want before we communicate it to the other. Being very clear about what we want is the most important part of step one, which is setting a boundary. The next step, which is a very crucial step, which is what distinguishes a boundary from an expectation, is communicating this boundary to the other. This is extremely crucial. If you do not communicate it and then you're going to be angry, upset, resent, hate the other person for not doing something which they don't even know about, is completely unfair. I like the communication which keeps it's okay and it's not okay. So what's okay, what's not okay. So for example, we may be telling our children it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to yell and pound the wall. So this is clear distinction, what's okay and what's not okay. Once you have communicated, so we set a boundary and then we communicate the boundary to this other person. The most important part is the step where you hold boundaries. This is the hardest part, and this is where we need to go a little bit in deeper within and find out what is making it so hard for us to hold this boundary. For example, you set a boundary with a child and the child questions that boundary, and immediately we lose our self-regulation and we get angry. So this is where you see how boundary plays such an important role in self-regulation. You've set a boundary, you know what you want, and you've communicated to the child. But the holding is where we're having a problem. So when that resistance comes, that is where we need to hold on to our emotional self-regulation through the tools that we've been talking about, by getting into our body, breathing, feeling our feelings fully, but not reacting, but sitting with it. So this is where we hold the boundary. Now, what happens if this questioning creates too much anxiety within us? We are going to let go of the boundary. Either we give in or we react. And that's where the emotional regulation goes away. So the place that most people find it very difficult is in the holding the boundaries. But setting the boundaries can be a hard one too, especially if we are not clear of what we want and we are having difficulty in making decisions. That can also be a place where we could stumble. And the next step is even the communication. Sometimes we're not courageous enough to say what we want and to set a boundary because we have these hidden illusions that setting a boundary is not caring, setting a boundary is not compassionate. And these underlying illusions is what we need to look at if you're not able to communicate. And if you're not able to set, you need to see the underlying reasons into why there is the problem in decision making, or why is it that I don't know what I want. The connection to the self may be disconnected, and so you don't really know what you want. So setting boundaries, communicating boundaries, and holding boundaries. Say you're having a conversation with a friend on a phone and you decide you have only half an hour, and the boundary that you would set is I'm going to talk for half an hour, right? I'm going to talk for half an hour is the boundary that you set. Now, communicating that boundary is important. So when your friend calls, you say that I have only half an hour, so I'll be talking for half an hour. So that's a boundary that you're communicating. So you've set a boundary, you've communicated it. Now holding is where it comes. Now your friend decides to talk a little bit more. So at half an hour point, if this is a really important thing for you, then you say, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to disconnect now because I need to go. So that's where you're holding your boundary. But now if you start feeling, oh, she's sharing something, I don't want to cut her down, and you don't, then it's not that other person's fault. It is not the job of the other person to hold our boundaries. It is our job to hold our boundaries. I really want to listen to this more, but maybe another time because I need to leave right now. And you leave. And maybe you can remind them like 5 or 10 minutes earlier saying that, hey, I'm going to have to leave in half an hour. And this is a mini boundary, a boundary within a boundary. So, and at all times you see, I know what I want, that I want to leave in half an hour. If I'm wishy-washy about that, I could stumble again while holding. Or if it's a sand boundary and you feel flexible, then you can say, okay, I can talk for 5 more minutes. But that's for you to decide, and that's again your decision, and you're making it into a sand boundary. If it's a stone boundary, then you need to leave. Now, after this can also happen where you can't hold your boundary, you speak, and the half an hour becomes 1 hour, and then you miss whatever it is that you wanted to do. Now you have resentment, you have anger, and you have disappointment that you could not do what you wanted, and you are angry at this other person and you think they are the ones who are at fault. Do you see how this is the emotional deconstruction that we need to do? Did I tell her about my boundary? Did I remind her that I have to leave? Did I say, okay, I'm sorry, I'm leaving? That is all in our control. So this is where I think we have to really understand the boundary setting process. And let me summarize it for you. Setting the boundary, communicating the boundary, holding the boundary. Now, all this other information about stone boundaries, sand boundaries, the mini boundaries, you can have it. It's there at your disposal. But the main things are these which we need to sit, reflect, and figure out. And if for some reason you can't hold a boundary, there's no need to beat ourselves up. We know we didn't hold it, right? So in this particular example which I gave you, I spoke for 1 hour. And now I couldn't do my work. But one thing I know is it's not the other person's fault, right? It's my responsibility. So where did I miss out? Why did I not say at that half an hour point that I need to leave? What was happening there? When you analyze like this, the next time you set a boundary, you will be able to hold it. And this is a process. It's not something that happens. And I'm telling you, even after years of boundary setting, sometimes it just doesn't happen. And it's about reflecting. It's about finding out. Sometimes we don't even have the boundary because we think we don't need it. And suddenly the need of it arises. So these are things that we need to go moment by moment and see. Boundary setting is hard. It's not easy for everyone. So be compassionate with yourselves when you are setting a boundary. And I hope this video helped you in these 3 steps that are needed for boundary setting. And if you liked what you heard, please consider sharing it with your friends. Hit the subscribe button to be notified of new videos that I post. And until we meet again, stay alive and present to emotional discoveries. Thank you.